Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the breakout session 2 on how to address the accumulation of risks in subnational debt management through capacity building and stronger coordination. My name is Ottaviano Canuto. I am one of the executive directors of the board of the World Bank, but I've been around for long enough to work in several capacities, both here at the bank and on the IMF, and including a previous engagement with the topic at discussion today, when Lily Liu here and I, added a book, Until Death Do Us Part, which is available to download. So I take the chance to make as well the merchandising, including a version in Chinese, which was a hit in China. But while this book and previous work done by the bank approached the regimes of insolvency and how to deal with insolvency situations and so on, today we have another orientation, a field where the World Bank has also maintained a strong interest in helping the countries, which is with respect to the legal framework that devolves fiscal authority and responsibilities to subnational governments. This obviously often includes subnational governments' ability to borrow, capacity. Even in the absence of explicit guarantee mechanism, subnational borrowing can create contingent liabilities for central governments. Therefore, central governments have the interest to ensure borrowing processes and decisions are sound. Subnational authorities, on their side, have an incentive to borrow at the lowest cost while keeping risk under control. So this breakout session will focus on how debt management capacity can be built in subnational governments, starting from the institutional setup, capacity and skills, sound debt recording and reporting on debt portfolios. It will also cover the coordination framework between the central and subnational levels. We do have a fantastic, a superb team of panelists here. Deputy Director General of the Budget Department of the Ministry of Finance of China, Mr. Kebin Wang. The Director of Local Government Finance Policy at the National Treasury of South Africa, Judy Nkosi. And also the Director of the Communalist Sveriges AB, Swedish Local Government Funding Agency in Sweden, Mr. Ulf Bengtsson. So the idea is that we have each one of them presenting their views in up to 15 minutes, and then we'll have some time for Q&A. Okay? I will enjoy as much as you. So let us start with Mr. Wang, please.
Good morning. It's my great honor to share with you China's framework of laws and regulations on subnational government debt management. I'm not good at listening and speaking in English. To promote efficiency, I have translated my opinion into English and read here. If anyone have questions, and I would like to my good friend Lily to help me for help. Okay. The current system of subnational government debt management was created in 2015 in China, when China's new budget law came into effect. Though the time is not long, this system has been based on international experiences and focused on China's specific situation. It has helped overcome many challenges and has been effective in promoting economic development and preventing financial risks. Now my topic here including 3 parts. And the first part is current situation of China's public debt. And part two is regulating subnational government debt achievements. And third, the next step. Now I will introduce the part one. Current situation of China's public debt. At present, the overall risk of subnational government debt in China is generally controllable. By the end of 2017, the debt balance of subnational governments in China was 16.51 trillion yuan, equivalent to 2.38 trillion US dollars. In terms of debt ratio, which is outstanding debt balance divided by total subnational government financial resources, the number was 76.5%. Taking into account the central government debts, which amounted to 13.48 trillion yuan, equivalent to 1.95 trillion US dollars, the amount of China's total outstanding public debt was 29.95 trillion yuan, equivalent to about 4.33 trillion US dollars. The debt to GDP ratio was 36.2. These ratios are below the widely accepted warning standards and also lower than that of major market economics and emerging market economics. By the end of September 2018, the debt balance of subnational government in China was about now 18.64 trillion yuan, equivalent to 2.7 trillion US dollars. Below the debt limit of 21 trillion yuan, equivalent to 3.03 trillion US dollars, as approved by China's legislature, the National People's Congress, NPC. We expect there will be no major changes in the risk level by the end of this year. And part two, regulation subnational government debt achievements. In 2014, China's legislature, the National People's Congress, NPC, amended the budget law, and the new law came into effect on January 1st, 2015. For the first time, the new law explicitly stipulates that subnational governments are allowed to borrow through government bonds within the approved debt limit. Any other channels of borrowing by subnational governments is prohibited by law. Also, unless otherwise stipulated by law, subnational governments are prohibited to provide any form of guarantee for debts of any entities or individuals. In the meantime, the new law stipulates detailed and specific provisions with respect to the issuer, the means, the procedure, the purpose, and the responsibilities of subnational government borrowing. Since the implementation of the new budget law, the Chinese government has strictly strictly enforced the legal requirements and issued a series of supporting regulations, notably including the opinions on strengthening management of subnational government debt by State Council. These regulations further refined and clarified the relevant legal provisions. As authorized by the budget law, the Ministry of Finance is the supervisor of the subnational government debts. It has released regulations covering every aspect of subnational borrowing, including debt limit, budget management, risk warning, emergency response, daily supervision, and so on. They have formed a closed-loop system of management. The first point is implementing debt limit management. Subnational governments can only borrow within the approved debt limit. The total debt limit is approved by the NPC or its standing committee, and the debt limits for different provinces are approved by the State Council below the total debt limit. The total debt limit was set at 16 trillion yuan in 2015, 17.19 trillion yuan in 2016, 18.82 trillion yuan in 2017, and 21 trillion yuan in 2018, equivalent to 3.03 trillion US dollars. This is the limit. This statutory ceiling of borrowing for subnational governments has been effective in preventing excessive growth of government debts. The second point is incorporating all subnational government debts into budget management. According to the budget law, the Ministry of Finance has refined regulations for budget management. All debts borrowed by every level of subnational government are incorporated into the budget, submitted to the People's Congress at corresponding levels for approval, and get public disclosure. And this also helps to enhance the transparency of subnational government debts. The third point is issuing subnational government bonds to finance construction of public welfare projects. As approved by the NPC, the increase of the total subnational government debt limit was 600 billion yuan in 2015, 1.18 trillion yuan in 2016, 1.63 trillion yuan in 2017, and 2.18 trillion yuan, equivalent to 316 billion US dollars in 2018. The bonds issued within these limits are primarily used on major projects in public welfare areas, such as poverty alleviation, shantytown renovation, and environment improvement. At the same time, to deal with the stock of debts borrowed by subnational government through the local government financial vehicles, as LGFVS, before the new budget law came into force, after reporting to the NPC Standing Committee, we launched a replacement program in a 3-year interim period for subnational government to replace those debts with government bonds issued. By doing so, the creditors of these debts changed from LGFAS to provincial governments, and the form of these debts changed from loans or corporate bonds to government bonds. All have to change into government bonds. From 2015 to the end of August 2018, the amount of stock debts replaced has reached an accumulative value of 12.19 trillion yuan, equivalent to 1.76 trillion US dollars. The debt replacement has reduced the financing costs of subnational governments by over 1.7 trillion yuan, over 246 billion US dollars, while at the same time reduced losses from bad debts in the financial system. Up to now, a remaining about 200 billion yuan, around $3 billion of stock debts haven't been replaced, mainly due to the creditors not agreeing to replace these debts. The fourth point is improving management of subnational government bonds. At present, the outstanding amount of subnational government bonds is about 17.41 trillion yuan, accounting for 98.5% of subnational government debts. The subnational government bond has become the largest variety in China's bond market. With the advantage of transparency and low costs, it is an optimal financing tool that meets the interests of taxpayers and the needs for good governance. Depending on the sources of debt service, we designed two types of subnational government bonds: general bonds and special bonds. Special bonds means revenue bonds. Okay. General bonds are repaid mainly with taxes. General equivalent to general responsibility bonds. Okay. And special bonds are repaid mainly with the proceeds generated from the projects that they fund. We have launched a number of special bond varieties as pilot programs in areas including land reserve, toll roads, and shantytown renovation to enrich the varieties of specific bonds. Local governments have also issued special bonds funding city rail transport, colleges, hospitals, and so on, effectively meeting reasonable financing needs in key sectors. Meanwhile, we are taking measures to promote diversification of subnational government bond investors and improve the credit rating and information disclosure mechanisms to promote the orderly development of the government bond market. The fifth point is conducting assessment and early warning of subnational government debt risks. The MOF has been organizing yearly assessments of the debt risks for all levels of subnational governments and notified relevant departments and provincial governments of the risk situation in different regions. We also instructed all provincial governments to make risk resolution plans and emergency response plans. The sixth point is establishing an emergency response mechanism for subnational government debt risks. The Chinese government issued the emergency response plan and the guidance on the classification and the treatment of risks in subnational government debt. These regulations establish a system of response to different levels of risk events and strictly implement accountability for risk events. They serve as precautionary countermeasures to potential debt risks. The seventh point is building a normalized supervision mechanism. The Chinese government issued several regulations to clarify a positive list and a negative list on subnational government financing. In order to resolutely stop the illegal financing activities and at the same time prohibit disguised borrowing in the name of PPP projects, government investment funds, government procurement, and so on. Meanwhile, for the cases of illegal financing by subnational governments, central government departments or provincial governments has developed a mechanism of find one case, investigate one case, punish one case. Local government financing institutions and intermediaries involved in the cases are held accountable and punished according to law. Meanwhile, the result get public exposure as warning cases. Up to now, more than 100 people or officials have been sentenced to dismissal, fines, and other sanctions. The above measures have been effective as they helped boost local economic growth through legitimate government borrowing, while at the same time helped preventing financial risks. And part 3, next steps. Although the overall risks of subnational government debts in China are under control, some challenges do exist. Potential debt risks are observed in certain regions, and illegal debt financing by subnational government are observed occasionally. For next step, the Chinese government will adhere to the principle of opening the front door, blocking the back door, to further improve the subnational government debt management and mitigate financial risks. First, we will continue to discipline subnational government to strictly comply with the budget law and the relevant regulations, and further strengthen the debt limit and budget management. Second, we will further open the front door of legitimate debt issuance. The debt limit for subnational government should be set reasonably to meet the needs of local economic and social development in different regions, and the reform of special bond management will be carried on. Third, we will firmly block the black door or illegal borrowings. All subnational government should borrow by issuing government bonds. And disguised borrowing is the name of PPP projects, government investment fund, government procurement, or any other way are strictly prohibited. We will put more efforts in investigation and enforcement. We will also improve the performance assessment system for local officials and establish a lifelong accountability mechanism. Fourth, we will accelerate the market-oriented transition of LGFVS. The LGFVS must be turned into self-financing SOEs and manage their own business and equal competitors on the market, and strictly prohibited from borrowing illegally for subnational governments. Finally, we will work with the financial regulations to urge financial institutions to follow the compliance and prudent requirements and effectively strengthen their risk control. That's all for my introduction. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Nkosi.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning.
Good morning.
Okay. So I'm going to be presenting some of the legal framework and the implementation and some of the reforms which, as South Africa, we are undertaking as it relates to subnational debt, or rather borrowing. So as a high level, that slides just give you an overview of how the architecture of South Africa looks like. So we are having 3 spheres of government, which is national government, we have provincial government, we have also a local government. So the provincial and local government, those are the ones that we refer to as subnational. And interesting enough is that all these spheres, the 3 spheres of government, they are this distinctive, interdependent and interrelated. And the Constitution gave them the mandate that they have to cooperate together in a mutual trust and in good faith. So the Constitution is the overarching legislation or legal document that we have, which guides on how these 3 spheres, they have to work together and how they have to perform certain things. So based on the Constitution, the local government, so the provincial government, they have the borrowing powers, but to a very limited extent, because as national government, we control, or we rather approve on how they should be borrowing and what they should be borrowing for. But as it relates to local government, we don't necessarily approve on how they have to borrow, and we just make some comments and make recommendation on how they should be doing things. So the Constitution also make it mandatory that we have to put in place some legislation which govern on how the local government should be doing things. I won't go through those ones that I have mentioned there, but these are some of the legislation that we have in place, which are used by local government when they do their business. Okay, and then these are some of the principles which underpin how the system works, and these are very critical because all the spheres, when they are doing their business, they have to ensure that they follow all these principles. One is accountability, transparency and governance, mutual support, revenue sharing, broaden access to services, responsibility over budgets. What we're saying here is all, or each and every sphere, they are responsible for their own budgets, and they are also responsible for their own priorities at subnational level. Okay, that is in a nutshell. I won't go through that one, but it shows you how, because we have what we call different mandates in different spheres of government. So we'll have the mandate which are performed by a national government, and we have mandates that are performed by the provinces, and mandates that are performed by a local government. Why this is important? It's important because the mandates which are allocated to each and every sphere has a bearing in terms of the fiscal responsibility of that particular sphere. So to a certain extent, the mandates which local government sphere they are being allocated, they are all to a certain level controlled by the national and the provincial government. So there are very few mandates which the local government will have where they take full responsibility, in the sense that as a national government we will have to put in a legislation in terms of how they have to carry their mandates. Okay, and the other area which is also critical is that the constitution requires that the national and the province, they have to provide capacity support and some interventions to local government. And how do you do that? These are prescribed in the legislation. So there are processes which you have to follow when you have to do some intervention or you have to provide some capacity in the local government. For example, in the constitution, there's a particular section which says it requires that if a local government fails, as a province or as a national government, you have to intervene. And when you intervene, there are certain things which you can do. You can just appoint somebody who can oversee how the sphere of government is being managed. And I think to a certain extent that gives comfort to the investors, because they know that if a municipality is not run well or if they went into crisis, to a certain extent the province and the national government will come in place and try to provide that kind of intervention and a support, and they will ensure that if they have undertaken a debt, that kind of a debt to a certain extent is managed by the national and the provincial government to ensure that whatever they have taken is being paid back to the people who have borrowed them. Okay, and this is in a nutshell how the fiscal framework is structured in the local government. We have the national transfers, and we also have the local government have the revenue raising powers. And this is very exciting, or rather there's also disparities there, because even at the local or the municipalities, we have three types of municipalities. So we'll have the metros, we'll have the district municipalities, and we have the local municipalities. So the metros, these are the bigger ones, which are the cities, and they are able to borrow, they have a capacity to raise their own revenue, and the opposite will have the small municipalities, which they are largely dependent on the transfers which they get from the national government. So when we talk about that, when we talk about borrowing, to the larger extent, this apply to your bigger municipalities which have capacity to raise their own revenues. Okay, so when it comes to that, so the powers to the local government sphere, it has been prescribed in the constitution. So municipalities, they have powers to raise their own, to raise the loans for capital expenditure and for current expenditure. But we also differentiate between the two. So the capital expenditure, it can be for long term, but when it comes to the current, which is for operational purposes, they can do that within one particular financial year. And even when it relates to that, they have to indicate in terms of which revenue are they going to use to pay back that money which they are borrowing for operational purposes. And then one other thing which we have as a legal framework, we have the Municipal Finance Management Act, which is the most municipalities, they call it the Bible of local government sphere, because this is the legislation which govern on how municipalities they manage their finances, starting from the budgeting, starting from how they spend their money, and also reporting in terms of the budgets which they have as the sphere of government. And that was informed by a policy which was developed, which is a policy on the borrowing, which we call borrowing framework for local government. And there is also a specific chapter in that legislation which talks to how the local sphere they have to undertake their borrowing, and also how are we supposed to support them as a national government if they are going through financial crisis. And to a certain extent, the borrowing policy that I talk about, which informed the establishment of this legislation, it has been successful in terms of the implementation. And we have a lot of private lenders that have come on board, and we have seen some significant investment in municipal loans and bonds as well. And also, so the process itself, it has evolved. And because it has almost been 20 years since we have this legislation in place. So the system is quite stable now, and most investors, they are comfortable with what we are having in place. So like I have indicated, that municipalities are authorized to engage in two types of borrowing, which is a short-term borrowing, which is used to support the cash flow management, and also the long-term borrowing. And what is important to note is that we don't have a threshold. There's no fixed ratios or limits on municipal borrowing. So we don't have a limit on how much the municipalities must be borrowing. And what we do at the national level, from National Treasury perspective, we monitor the key indicators and also the ratios. So what we do is, if a particular municipality intends to incur a debt, they are required by law that they must come to national government and submit their proposal. So we do assess their proposal, but not with the intention of approving it. So with that assessment, and also we just give them the views. What we look into is, we are encouraging that they must borrow for the projects that will generate revenue in most cases. So we do those assessments, ensure that whatever they are borrowing for is something which it will provide value to the sphere of government. And interesting enough is that most of the lenders, when they want to engage with the local government, they will want to see what was the view of National Treasury. That also gives them comfort, because if we say we don't feel or we don't think like this is a right way to do, we don't think you can borrow for this kind of a project, they take those kind of advices into consideration, such that they can, at the end of the day, so sorry, we are not going to borrow you for that thing, because they view our advices very well, or they take them very serious. And so what is happening is that the municipal council, they have a final say to authorize the bond. And another thing is that municipality, they must also issue a notice to the public. So the public have to be informed of what is happening in their particular municipalities. So they will issue a notice which public are allowed to provide their own inputs, because at the end of the day, these are the ratepayers that have to pay the money which the municipality is going to use to repay back the debt which they have incurred. And another area is there are disclosures requirements. So we have what we call budget reporting on a quarterly basis, where municipalities, they have to tell us, this is what I have borrowed, and these are the projects that I have borrowed for, and this is the amount that I have used so far from the amount that I have borrowed, and this is what is left. So we have those disclosures requirements. And I think all these kind of arrangements, to a certain extent, they provide some comfort to our investors that there is that transparency in the system. Okay, so in a nutshell, just want to show you how the municipal borrowing trend has grown over the years. As you can see, from 1996 to 1997, it has been growing in terms of the nominal, I think over by 16.9 billion rands, and also by 60.3 billion at the end of financial year 2017 and 18. This is a long-term debt which we're talking about. And also we try to indicate some split in terms of the loans and your bonds. And the main concern that we've been having currently is that it seems like the loans, they continue to form the larger part of the borrowing as compared to the bonds, which are for a long term compared to the loans which are more of a short term. But recently we have seen some of the metros coming on board, issuing some bonds, like we had 2 municipalities that issued the bonds which are for environmental purposes. Okay, and we also split in terms of the public and private sector lending to municipalities, just to show you how these two are split. And public sector, we're referring to the DFIs, and over the years, the private sector was dominating in the space, but there's a trend that we have picked up recently where we see that DFIs, they have started to overtake the private sector, which is one area which has become a concern, and we need to look into to ensure that they don't overcrowd the private sector in the system. Okay, so despite all this successful implementation of the legislations that we have in place, we still do have some challenges in the system, and these are some of the things that we want to address. Some of the areas or some of the things that we have picked up is that the borrowing is not long-term as initially intended. So when we introduced the borrowing framework in place, we were under the impression that we want the borrowing to be long-term, not the short-term tenure. And the other area is that the secondary markets have not developed or is not vibrant as we anticipated. And when we engage with some of them, they indicated to us that, some of the regulations that we have in place is strict, you need to relax them. So we started engaging with them to find strategies and a way on how we can try to create enabling environment to ensure that we have a secondary market that is vibrant for the municipalities. And also, like I have indicated, that the role of the FIs, it seems like it's not clearly defined. Hence, we find that as time goes on, they are starting to crowd out private sector. So it's an area where we're saying, okay, DFIs, let's work together to ensure that we balance the system, come on board and play a role that will close the gap other than trying to come and compete with the private sector in the system. Okay, so based on some of these challenges that we have identified, what we are doing now is that we are updating the policy framework that we have put in place. And one critical area which is very important to note is that the updates that we are putting in place, it still confirms the core principle of our legislation, which is that central government doesn't guarantee municipal debt. So if the municipality takes the debt, is based on their credit worthy of those municipalities. So there's no guarantee that is being provided by central government. So these are some of the highlights which the update we are looking into in terms of the policy that we are doing now, or some of the things that we are updating. And for issues that are very critical to the lenders is that we are starting to emphasize the importance of reliable information and disclosures. This will help to ensure that there's efficient pricing setting in the system. And to facilitate some of these things, there are some of the bulletins or some of the informations that we are publicizing as national government. Some of the information I have mentioned there, like we have a quarterly borrowing bulletin which we publish on a quarterly basis. So if you get that kind of a document, it will tell you the trends in the system in terms of how much local government has borrowed, how is it growing, which are the players in the system. So this is some of the information that we are making it public. And another area that we have looked into, we have a system which we call it municipal money. So in a municipal money, if you click that kind of a link, it takes you straight to the information. So if a lender is interested in lending in a particular municipality, that will give you the information about all the municipalities that are there in South Africa. The information will include like the financial statements, how are they performing, the income and the budgets, the expenditure, and so on and so on. So at the click of a tab, as an investor, you are able to get information that can help you to make informed decision about who do you want to lend and who do you do not want to lend. Okay, and some of the issues that we're looking into is encouraging public and private efforts to support liquid secondary market. Like I have indicated, that we're engaging with some of the markets to ensure that what are the things that we can put in place to ensure that we have a vibrant secondary market. And also we make it very clear that some of the instruments actually that can be used by municipalities to leverage and borrowing, they can be used. We're talking about instruments such as pooled finance mechanism and so on. So we make it very clear and clarify them on how municipalities they can use them. And also the role which DFIs they can play in the system or in the space to ensure that they close the gap instead of competing with the private sector. So these are some of the things that we're looking into. Okay, and then for borrowers, what we are doing with them is we ensure that, or we are working with them to ensure that they are coming with their long-term financial strategies, because this has bearing, or it has implication in terms of if investors want to engage with them, they need to understand in terms of what are their long-term plans in terms of their finances as a municipality. Another area which we're also working with them is on the project preparation, because when you engage with the lenders, they will tell you we are much interested to participate in the space, but the challenge that we're having is that we don't have a project that are bankable. So as national government, we're trying to work with the municipality to support them to ensure that they can develop that kind of a capacity where they can prepare some bankable projects, and also we support them that they can enhance their revenue strategies, which can help them with their credit worthiness. So yeah, I think these are some of the small things that we're also doing some reforms. Thank you.
Thank you, thank you. So we have had the coordination between the central and local levels. We have had the perspective from the national treasury, and now we're going to have the perspective of the borrower, of the subnational borrower. Yes, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Canuto, and good morning, everyone. I will, during my 15 minutes, give you a brief introduction to Communalist, and I will give you some another perspective than my two panelists have done. I will more or less give a bottom-up perspective instead of a top-down perspective on local government financing. I will, to give you some idea what you can expect from me during my presentation, I will inform you that I'm not a market specialist. I have not worked today on a daily basis on the financial market, and my responsibilities within Communalist are more or less on institutional arrangements and membership issues. So what you can expect from me is an introduction about the institutional arrangements and not so much about funding and lending. Although having said that, I will try to give you at the end some information about the funding and lending from Communalist. I will start with saying a little bit about the regional and local sector in Sweden, Communalist role and setup, local government borrowing needs and Communalist lending, and the funding and green loans, and then a little bit about follow-up and members and risk management and relations to the central level. I will start with the regional local sector in Sweden. Sweden has three levels of government: the national, the regional and local, and the Swedish parliament, the Riksdag, is the supreme national decision-making body. On the regional local level, there are 290 local governments, municipalities, and 20 county councils. And as you can see of this slide, the municipalities and county councils are responsible for the core activities of the welfare system. Approximately about 70% of the public spending is in the local government sector, local and regional government sector. And county councils are primarily responsible for providing health care and supporting regional growth, and local government are primarily responsible for schools, elderly care, housing, energy supply, and water supply. Both the municipalities and county councils have considerable autonomy and independent powers of taxation. The right for municipalities and county councils to levy taxes was established as early as 1862, and they are levied as a percentage of the inhabitants' incomes, and local governments set their own tax rates, and they vary between 29 to 35% of the inhabitants' income. There are some very strong institutional arrangements, and they contribute to sustaining sound finances in the local government sectors. I will mention a few of those that are mentioned on the slide. The most important one is the balanced budget requirement. Every year, local governments must adopt a balanced budget and the financial plans for the next 3 years. If the council decides to introduce new expenditure during the current budget year, the decision must also contain details how to finance the expenditure. If a deficit is reported for a particular financial year, the general rule is that the council, after looking into the balance requirements, must adopt an action plan for restoring the deficit in no more than 3 years. To ensure that the local governments, irrespective of tax base and structural conditions, have an equal conditions for providing services, there is a system of balance in incomes and costs, as mentioned as the financial equalization scheme, and it equalizes both taxes, both income and costs. And cost equalization even out differences in structural costs between municipalities and county councils, and is primarily a system that is equalized between county councils and municipalities. And there is also an income equalization, and that is primarily state funded. There is also local government financing principle, which means that if the government changes the tasks of the local government and moves tasks from the central government to the local government, they have to neutralize the financial effects between the levels. Let me say a few words about Communalist. Communalist was founded in 1986 by 10 local governments in the area, in one geographic area of Sweden, and the membership of the society is only available for Swedish municipalities and county councils, and it is based on a voluntarily principle. At this date, 277 municipalities out of 288 and 11 out of 20 county councils are members of the society. It is expected that the members of the society will increase over time until nearly all of Sweden's municipalities and county councils are members. And then you can, of course, ask the question, why haven't we got all county councils and municipalities as members? We have more or less all county councils and municipalities that are small or medium-sized. We have some of the bigger municipalities and county councils that are not members of Communalist, and that is due to the fact that they have the capacity for having their own funding arrangements, and they have the ability to have their own market programs. For example, the capital Stockholm and the County Council of Stockholm, they are not members of the Communalist Economic Society. Our primarily interest is not to generate profits from its owners, but to secure access to long-term, cost-efficient financing and provide financial services to municipalities and county councils. We are rated by Moody's and Standard & Poor's. As you can see, we have a AAA from both of them and stable outlook. And we had a balance sheet in the third quarter of about 400 billion Swedish crowns. That would be a little more than 40 billion US dollars, and the lending portfolio of about 335 billion Swedish crown. I will say a few words about the legal structures. Communalist is owned by its members, and it owns 100% of the credit market company. And the highest decision-making body is the corporate society and the annual meeting of the corporate society. The principle is that the board of directors of the society deals with the membership activities and membership matters, while the board of directors from the credit market company involves in all the financial issues and the financial decisions. The board of the Communalist Corporate Society or Economic Society issues every year an owner directives, which are adopted by an annual meeting. And of course, in these owner directives, they include guidelines on lending, desired financial result, consolidation target, liquidity requirement, risk levels, principles of business, expertise, and development of new products, and so on and so forth. One of the most important things for Communinvest is that each member in Communinvest must enter into a joint and several guarantee for all present and future liabilities of Communinvest as if they were liabilities on their own. So it's based on what you could call a solidarity principle. So if you enter your membership, you must enter this guarantee. And the undertaking is unconditional. Any member who leaves the society will continue to be liable for all obligation of Communinvest at the time of such a resignation. But no one has yet left the organization, so that is not a thing that we have to have discussed yet. When a municipality or a county council enters as a member, it must immediately pay a certain amount as a participation capital, and is based on a fixed amount multiplied by the number of inhabitants in the municipality or the county council. And this fixed amount is decided every year by the board of directors. As you can see on this slide, we have increased quite a lot in the numbers since we were established in 1986, 1987. Nowadays, as I said, there are 288 members. And as you can see, the lending has also increased very much during these years. And of course, during the financial crisis, the lending from Communinvest also increased very much. And we are the largest individual lender in the local governments in Sweden. Important to say, before we go further, is to say that each municipality or county council determines itself how it wants to finance its operations. It has access to, in principle, three forms of financing: borrowing through Communinvest, or borrowing through the banking sector or any other bilateral parties, or direct borrowing from the capital market. So it's not, they don't have to use, even though they are members, they don't have to use Communinvest as an organization. If you look at the local government investments on total, and that includes both the members and the non-members of Communinvest, there is substantial growth in the annual investments, and this is mainly for two reasons. There's a strong population growth in Sweden, and that consists of both high birth rates, aging population, and migration. And secondly, there is an aging infrastructure. The Swedish welfare system was more or less rapidly expanded in the 1960s and 70s, and a lot of the houses, hospitals, schools, etc., were built during this period. So the need for renewal and new houses, buildings, etc., is at the moment increasingly higher than it was just a few years ago. The annual growth of investment, of course, means that the local government debt has increased, but not as much as expected. As you can see, there are about the local government debt is about 600 billion Swedish crowns, and as you could see on one of the earlier slides, about 300, a little more than 300 of those are issued by Communalist. But the reason for that the local government debt development isn't as high as we could think is that the main reason for that is that a lot of investment has been financed by positive cash flow and a positive operating result during the last years. As you can see on the right side of the slide, the local government debt as a percentage of GDP has more or less been stable during the last 15 years, and the debt is about 15% of GDP, compared to the state sector is about 30 or a little less than 30%. You can also notice that the debt in the household and the companies have increased during the same period quite a lot, and that has become more of a political problem in Sweden than the debt of local government and the state government. I'll say a few words about funding. We use capital from both the national and international capital market. The capital that we not yet have lent out to customers is deposited in accounts with credit institutions or invested in interest-bearing securities. The counterparts are governments, financial institutions, or government-guaranteed organizations. Our funding activity is based on diversified sources of funding as regards to geographical markets, investors, categories, currencies, and products. As you can see on this slide, we have funding by currency. Most of it is funded in US dollars or Swedish crowns and some Japanese yen. And funding by program, there is the benchmark funding and the Swedish benchmark program. The Swedish benchmark program, and an interesting fact that I wanted to share with you is the spread against Swedish government 5-year bonds and Communalist. As you can see, the spread has tightened during the last years, but it's still a spread between Communalist and Swedish government 5-year bonds. We think that from Communalist perspective, we think that this should tighten during the years, and it has potential to tighten too when the liquidity in the market is growing better and when our Swedish benchmark program is increasing. We are also a leading Nordic green bond issuer. We have issued, on this slide is only 4 green bonds that have issued. In fact, we issued a new green bond just a few weeks ago. And this, of course, is due to the fact that our owners have a strong demand for green investments. And we have issued these green investors since 2016. For different type of projects, it could be green buildings, wind power, energy effectiveness, public transport, waste and water management, or other projects which have positive environmental and climate impact. And we are also very proud. I just passed this. I see that my time is running out. We are very proud of being one of the 10 green bond issuers from the Nordic countries that have agreed upon to publish a common position paper on financial, environmental and procedural aspects on impact reporting. We have also published our own impact report on green financing and green bonds from Communalist. Both these reports can be downloaded from our website. Just a few words about the credit analysis model and the follow-up of our members. As I said, we exclusively lend to Swedish local government sector, and each municipality and county council and region is screened before being approved as a member of the Communalist, and no municipality or county council has yet been denied membership. But membership is not the same thing as a general okay of using Communalist for all borrowing and investments. Each year, as a part of the review process, the board of directors sets credit limits for all the members, and the credit limits are universal and are set on the basis of each member's consolidated borrowing, and individual members can have differentiated credit limits. And we also monitor our members regarding risk, and we do a risk evaluation of all the members. And as you can see here, we use a quantitative model with 11 key factors. Member key ratios are measured and analyzed against both the members' trend and the average for similar members. And as you can see, when the risk is coming up to 6 or 7 or 8 or 9, there are just a few of our members that has that type of risks. The lower value, the less risk in this model. And of course, you can ask what happens if you have 7 or 8 or 9 on this risk evaluation. What we do then is to form some type of task force together with the member to come up with an action plan how to come back to a healthier risk level than they have at the moment. Just say a few words about the relations to the central level. The company that the society owns is a credit institution and is governed by all the bank regulations, of course, in Sweden. And we are supervised by the Swedish FSA. We are also governed by the resolution regulations that are based on the EU's Bank Recovery and Resolution Directive. And of course, we have informal contacts with the Ministry of Finance, with the Resolution Agency, with the Swedish FSA, with the Central Bank. But there are very few, for example, with the Swedish National Debt Office, there are no informal understandings about when to go to the capital market. They do it on their own, and we do it on our own. So there are not a very lot of informal discussions. Of course, we have a good contact with all the institutions, but an informal contact, but there's no formal discussion with them. Well, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. So let's use the remainder of our time before lunch for some questions, and if there are please identify yourself. Yeah.
Thank you very much for the 3 presentations. I think give us a very nice picture of 3 very different ways of dealing with the subnational borrowing issue. I have a specific question, if I may, for our colleagues from Sweden. The idea of a mandatory balanced budget embedded in law has been tested in other places, notably here in the US, where some states, which are sovereign by definition of the federation, have put the balanced budget requirement in the constitution of the states. But the implementations were such that the line in the budget was drawn further down. So de facto borrowing was part of income, and it was completely distorted as a tool beyond repayment capacity. So when you say balanced budget, has this definition of budget comply with IFS, International Fiscal Statistics? Do we know what that balanced budget is, or there are also specifics that we should be aware of? Thank you.
Let's see if, is there any yes? And then we'll also add one, and then we give them the chance to answer. Well, 1, 2, 3, 4, oh boy, okay. Yes, starting from you.
Thank you. This is Chidam Aslan. So my question is to Mr. Wang. You did mention that you would like to diversify the investors for the municipal bonds. So my question is, who are the current investors, and whether there are any non-residents investing in the municipal bonds? Thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity, Chair. My questions also goes for Mr. Wang. It's important that China took steps towards, of course, controlling local governments' fiscal positions. And so my question is, indeed, I have two questions. One is about the debt limit, the number. How do you set this number? What are the rationales behind these numbers, debt limits? Like, do you consider municipalities' financing needs or their long-term debt sustainability? Like, do you take their debt repayment capacity when you set this number, or allocate these numbers to individual municipalities? And also, this limit does this limit covers their loans from commercial banks? These are the few questions that I'd like to ask. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you very much. Thank you also for the presentation. I think I do have question to Chinese and to South Africans. This subnational bond issuance is very important. It is also relevant to my country. We have not using such instruments. But what I want to know from for example, the perspective of this, what you call it, currencies. For example, China is only issuing this, what you call it, bond foreign currency, or this yuan only? Is a local currency, or from also dollar or something like this? This is one. The other is what about from foreign currency? For example, investment needs sometimes foreign currency. So can regions borrow from external without the government guarantee, or they need to get guarantee? As far as the South Africans is concerned, I think you have indicated that there is no any guarantee. What about this, what you call it, currencies? Is it only your currency, or they need to only foreign currency? Or if there is, how is the relationship? Also, the second is budget relationship with the municipalities, the central government or federal, with these nine administration regions you have indicated. So the relationship also I want to know. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes. Let me just add mine, and then to them, and then we do the final wrap-up. Judy, so I was curious to know how coordinated is the issuance of bonds between the central government and municipalities. For instance, is there the days of auctions for the government bonds? Are also the municipalities allowed to issue? They have to wait? Is there any kind of a coordination with respect to bond issuance? And I was curious about the spread on your slide 21st on the Swedish benchmark program. The 5-year spread between the Communalist versus Sweden government. I would appreciate if you could say something on this. Okay, so then let's have the answers from our panelists.
Hi. Thank you for your question. And the first indicates that the diversification of investors, okay, should be promoted. Who are the current investors of subnational government bonds? At present, commercial banks are the main holders of China's subnational government bonds. From the end of 2015 to the end of 2017, the proportions of commercial banks in subnational government bonds holders were 92.3%, 88.1%, and 86.5%, respectively, with an average of 88%. Although the commercial bank hold nearly 90% of subnational government bonds, this proportion is decreasing year by year. With the continuing development and improvement of China's local government bond market and the accelerated pace of opening up, the effect of promoting the diversification of bond investors will be further demonstrated in the future. Is that okay? And the second, okay.
就是可能
外债，我知道了。
违约担保。
外债我看不是外债，它是第二个是这个问题，是这个吧？协调这个吧。第二个是这个。
不是这个，第二个问题就是说这个
外债。OK
你讲这个第三个问题就
I
是
see.
怎么样定
The
上限
second question, do municipals borrow or issue bonds in foreign currency? Okay. If yes, what are the constraints limits? Okay. No. According to the budget law, subnational governments in China are not authorized to borrow foreign debts. Okay. Also, currently they are not allowed to borrow in foreign currency outside China. When the local enterprises borrow from abroad, the law stipulated that no guarantees shall be provided by the subnational governments. Okay. Any kind of credit support provided by subnational government is regarded as illegal. The second. And the
这
third,
个问题是这个问题，就是
yeah.
怎么样定那个
With
上限？
okay, how? Okay.
这第六个问题，
Okay.
第六个问题，
哦
就怎么样这个债务的上限是怎么定的？
Okay.
就个性的这样的。
Okay. The third question: when the central government develops in debt management strategy, borrowing. Okay. Yes, the new budget law makes it clear that the Ministry of Finance is responsible for monitoring local government debts. First, every year, the State Council submits to National People's Congress the total limit for the nation's government debts, including both the central and the subnational government debts. The State Council determines debt limits for each province accordingly, setting a debt ceiling, preventing excessive growth of subnational debt. Second, the MOF Ministry of Finance has formulated a unified budget management mechanism, providing that all subnational government debts shall be included in the budget and are subject to approval and supervision by the legislation. Third, The MOF makes an assessment of debt risks for every level of subnational governments, warns the high-risk regions, and urges them to mitigate the risks. Fourth, the central government has enacted penalties for the violation of laws and regulations by local governments and publicized these penalties for the sake of warning. Is that okay?
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you.
Judy, and then next question.
Okay, thanks. So, in case of South Africa, municipalities can only borrow in local currency. So it is prescribed in the legislation. They are prohibited from borrowing in a foreign currency. And with regard to the issue of budget relationship between the spheres of government, how it works is that so municipalities are required to develop a 3-year funded budget. So as national government or the Ministry of Finance, what we do is you do an assessment of the budget of the municipalities to ensure that when they put it in place, it has been funded. So if it has not been funded, we'll make some recommendations and also some proposals on what are the areas which they can look into, and we send it back to the municipality. The council has to take a decision based on the recommendations that we have made to ensure that at the end they have the funded budgets. And also there are two processes. Then in the mid-year, there's another process where they can do some adjustments. So let's say there are certain things which they did not foresee at the beginning of financial year, and they want now to incorporate them in the mid-year. They will also have a mid-year or adjustment budget which they can still submit to Treasury, where we can look into and we make a comments based on the new priorities on some of the things. Or in a case where they foresee that they cannot spend certain revenue which they have, or they want to shift certain revenue to fund other projects that are now very urgent or priority of that municipality, they can do that in the mid-year. And when it comes to the issue of issuance of bonds, so it's not, so the issuance at the local level is more on an ad hoc basis. So it's not, there are no structured dates as compared to your national government where you know that in particular date you have to go and issue. So it's more on ad hoc basis based on when was it approved by the municipal council. So the processes of the council approving the whole deal, or of going to market and so on, that determines on when the municipality will go out. So it's not like coordinated, so it's based on an ad hoc basis in most cases.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
First of all, the question about the mandatory balanced budget. The background for the mandatory balanced budget on the local and regional sector comes from the financial crisis in Sweden during the 90s. There was a severe financial crisis with a deficit of about 30% of GDP in the annual budget, and the state debt increased to 80% of GDP and is now under 30% of GDP. And what Sweden did at that moment was to introduce a surplus target for the public sector, for the whole public sector, and the surplus target was in the beginning defined as 2% surplus over a business cycle, and then it was lowered to 1% for technical reasons. So there has been a surplus target for the last 15 to 20 years, and to be able to fulfill the surplus target for the whole public sector, you have to introduce some institutional arrangements also for the regional and local sector, and it has been very fruitful and has been more or less successful, and the local government and the regional government, they fulfill more or less the demands on the balanced budget. And the budgets on the local level and regional level is accrual budget. On the state level, it's not. On the state level, it's a cash budget. But on the local level, it's accrual. Both the budget and the accounting is accrual on the local level, and the local government and county council have to apply to international standards of accounting. So hopefully that will answer your question. And the second question about the spread against Swedish government bond, it has tightened. We think, from Communalist perspective, it's still too high. We are AAA rated, both from Moody's and Standard & Poor, and the local government sector is zero risk weighted, as the estate sector is. So we think after introducing the Swedish benchmark program, it has tightened. And as the amount of member is growing, and hopefully also the lending from communities, hopefully it will tighten even more, and maybe not be as low as the state sector, but the spread shouldn't be as high as it is at the moment. That's our view.
Okay, another question raised to Mr. Wang is how to decide the debt limit for each province. So basically, each year, the aggregate fiscal deficit that include subnational government and central government together is decided by taking into consideration the entire fiscal situation and monetary policy, fiscal policy over the macro policy, macro framework, as well as the infrastructure financing needs. For example, last year, the fiscal deficit for total public sector was set at 3% of GDP. And then this year was set at 2.6% GDP. That's well bit. It's a bit. This year actually is below the norm of the international, the Maastricht Agreement, the EU norm. Typically, it's 3%. So within that aggregate limit, basically is approved by the National People's Congress. Then the state council will and the Ministry of Finance will decide how this aggregate limit is divided between the central government and local subnational government, provincial government. Then within that allocation of the debt allocated across provinces, mainly decided by the financing needs, physical capacity of the province, as well as capacity to pay back the debt. It's the debt capacity and the debt service capacity, as well as the development needs. It's a very comprehensive exercise and deliberation. And also this, there's also the aggregate limit on the revenue bonds. So there's the one we're talking about 3 and 2.6% GDP, physical financing or net borrowing, is basically the general obligation that general obligation bonds is collateralized by the fiscal revenue of each level of government, but the revenue bonds is characterized by the income from the project, which is being financed by specific debt instrument, and that there's also aggregated limit to take into consideration and to prevent the excessive growth of debt and to ensure the fiscal and debt sustainability and a sustainable macro framework. Yeah, there's also there's a lot of all this. There's a very solid foundation to have a lot of data and also indicators like the physical. How do you measure physical capacity? How do you measure debt service capacity? How do you measure the risk? So there's a very comprehensive quantitative indicators developed to provide a foundation for the decision making.
Fantastic. Well, no matter if one thinks of China, South Africa, or Sweden, subnational finance inevitably has to face the asymmetry in the incentives, namely the possibility of sharing the costs of over-indebtedness with the other components of the system is equal everywhere. And we had today 3 magnificent presentations on the way by which the issue is tentatively controlled, monitored, regulated, and so on. And I thank very much for the quality of the presentations and also for the good questions that have been asked. So, next, lunch. Thank you very much. Great. My card is about to finish next week, but if you give me yours, I can. Thank you. And I'll send you the link to the book if you are interested.
Please do that.